Her supplies, her GPS, her pack, her means of communication and navigation, all of it was burning inside. She was alone in the wilderness without equipment, injured, and with no clear sense of her location relative to the lodge. But she was alive. And somewhere out there, Rachel was on the run with the twins, children who belonged to Ellie's son, Daniel, the very man Rachel had almost certainly killed. Ellie couldn't ignore that truth. If Daniel's death had truly been an accident, then why had Rachel tried to kill her, too, when she started asking too many questions? Ellie staggered to her feet, wincing at the pain that shot through her leg where the glass had cut her. The night was clear now, the stars brilliantly visible above the tree-line. She oriented herself using the North Star, recalling that the lodge lay to the west of the cabin. But before she could take a step in that direction, a faint sound caught her attention. A child's voice, high and frightened, calling out from somewhere in the forest. Forgetting her own injuries, Ellie moved toward the sound, her feet sinking into the deep snow. The voice came again, clearer this time, unmistakably one of the twins. She pushed through a stand of pine trees, following the cries, until she emerged into a small clearing. There, against a rock outcropping, a small figure in a purple jacket was huddled, one leg extended at an unnatural angle. "Run," Ellie called softly, approaching slowly so as not to frighten the child further. The girl looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Grandma Ellie, it hurts. My leg really hurts." Ellie crouched beside her granddaughter, carefully examining the injury. Even in the dim starlight, she could see that Ren's leg was either broken or severely sprained. The ankle was swollen to twice its normal size. "What happened, sweetheart?" Ellie asked, removing her scarf to create a makeshift splint. "Where's your mom and Ivy?" Ren sniffled. "I fell down the hill. Mom tried to help me, but then she said we had to keep going." "She said," the child's voice broke. "She said something about sacrifice. And then she took Ivy and left me here." Rage unlike anything Ellie had ever experienced flooded through her. Rachel had abandoned an injured child in the wilderness, her own daughter, in freezing temperatures that would have killed her before morning. "I'm here now," Ellie said, working to keep her voice calm and reassuring. "I'm going to get you somewhere safe." With gentle movements, she secured the splint around Ren's ankle, using branches and her scarf to immobilize the joint. Then, she lifted the child into her arms, cradling her against her chest. "It's going to be okay," she promised, turning toward what she hoped was the path back to civilization. "Hold on tight. We have a long walk ahead of us." Ren wrapped her thin arms around Ellie's neck, her body shivering with cold and shock. Despite her own injuries and exhaustion, Ellie found new reserves of strength as she began the arduous journey down the mountain, each step carrying precious cargo. She had no equipment, no map, and an injured child to protect. But she had decades of experience in these mountains and an iron determination that would not yield to pain or fatigue or fear. Somewhere ahead, Rachel was fleeing with Ivy. And when Ellie reached safety with Ren, she would make sure that woman never harmed another member of her family again. The journey down the mountain was a grueling test of endurance. Every muscle in Ellie's body screamed for rest, but she pushed forward, Ren's weight in her arms a constant reminder of what was at stake. The child had fallen into a fitful sleep, occasional whimpers escaping her lips when pain broke through her exhaustion. Ellie navigated by starlight and memory, choosing the gentler slopes when possible, carefully picking her way around obstacles she could barely see in the darkness. Each step required careful consideration, a fall now could be catastrophic for both of them. Hours passed this way, marked only by the slow movement of stars across the sky. As the eastern horizon began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, Ellie caught glimpses of familiar landmarks. They were approaching the maintained trails that would lead back to the lodge. "Run," she said softly, rousing the child. "Look, sweetie, we're almost there." The girl stirred, blinking groggily at their surroundings. Her face was pale with pain and cold, but a flicker of hope appeared in her eyes when she saw the trail markers ahead. "Is Mom there?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. The question caught Ellie off guard. How could she explain to a 7-year-old that her mother had tried to kill them both, that she had abandoned Ren to die in the snow? I don't know, she answered truthfully. But there are people who can help us, and that's what matters right now. The final stretch of their journey took them past the outlying cabins and toward the central lodge. As they emerged from the tree-line, Ellie could see early morning hikers preparing for their day, staff members setting up equipment. Summoning her last reserves of strength, she called out, "Help! We need help here." Heads turned. There was a moment of shocked stillness before people began running toward them. Ellie's legs finally gave out, and she sank to her knees in the snow, still cradling Ren protectively. "Get medical assistance," someone shouted. "And call the manager." Hands reached for them, helping Ellie to her feet, others carefully taking Ren from her arms. The warmth of the lodge's foyer enveloped them as they were guided inside, voices overlapping in concern and confusion. "It's Eleanor Whitaker," she heard someone say. "And one of the missing children." The lodge manager appeared, his face registering shock as he recognized her. "Miss Whitaker, what happened? How did you—" "Call the police," Ellie interrupted, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Rachel tried to kill me. She left Ren injured in the snow to die." A hushed silence fell over the gathered crowd. Some had begun recording the scene on their phones, but Ellie was beyond caring about privacy now. "We need to warm them up," the manager said, recovering his composure. "And the child needs medical attention immediately." They were guided to the large fireplace in the main room, where blankets appeared from somewhere, wrapped around their shoulders. A staff member with first aid training began examining Ren's injured leg while another brought hot drinks. "Miss Whitaker," the manager said, crouching beside her. "The gondola operators reported seeing a woman with a child early this morning. They weren't certain, but they thought it might have been Rachel." "With Ivy," Ellie finished for him. "Which way were they heading?" "Down the mountain." "Apparently, they moved quickly. Didn't stop to talk to anyone." Ellie's heart sank. If Rachel had already made it down the gondola, she could be anywhere by now. The wail of sirens announced the arrival of emergency services. Within minutes, the lodge was filled with police officers and paramedics. Ren was carefully transferred to a stretcher, paramedics stabilizing her leg and checking her vital signs. "I want to stay with my granddaughter," Ellie insisted as they prepared to move Ren. "Of course," one of the paramedics assured her. "We'll transport you both to the hospital." As they were being loaded into the medical helicopter, the quickest way to reach the nearest hospital, a police officer approached. "Miss Whitaker, we need to take a statement from you as soon as possible. We've already received conflicting information." "What do you mean?" Ellie asked, not releasing her hold on Ren's hand. "A woman identifying herself as Rachel Whitaker was brought to the hospital earlier by a hunter who found her and a child at the park's main entrance. She's made some serious allegations against you." Ellie stared at the officer in disbelief. "What kind of allegations?" "She claims you tracked them to a cabin where they'd been sheltering after her husband's disappearance. According to her statement, when you learned Daniel was presumed dead, you became enraged and attempted to harm her and the children." "That's absurd," Ellie said, anger giving her renewed energy. "She knocked me unconscious and left me to die in a cabin filling with gas. She abandoned Ren with a broken leg in freezing temperatures." The officer nodded, making notes. "We'll need formal statements from both of you and from the child when she's able." "Her name is Ren," Ellie said firmly. "And she needs medical attention more than you need her statement right now." "Of course. We'll meet you at the hospital." The officer stepped back as the helicopter crew secured the doors. As the helicopter lifted off, Ellie held tight to Ren's hand, watching the mountain landscape fall away beneath them. In just hours, she had found her family, lost her son all over again, and nearly died at the hands of the woman he had married. And now that same woman was attempting to twist the narrative to paint Ellie as the villain. The thought of Rachel holding Ivy, potentially poisoning the child's mind against her own grandmother and twin sister, made Ellie's blood boil. The paramedic monitoring room glanced at Ellie with concern. "Ma'am, I need to check your injuries, too. You have lacerations that need cleaning and a possible concussion from the blow to your head." Ellie nodded absently, allowing the medic to examine the wound at the back of her skull. Her mind was racing ahead to what waited at the hospital: Rachel's lies, a legal system that would have to sort truth from fiction, and the heartbreaking task of helping her granddaughters understand what had happened to their family. "Grandma Ellie," Wren's voice was faint but clear. "I'm scared." Ellie leaned closer, smoothing the child's hair back from her forehead. "I know, sweetheart, but I'm right here with you, and I'm not going anywhere." It was a promise she intended to keep, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The hospital corridor bustled with activity, nurses moving efficiently between rooms, doctors consulting charts, families waiting anxiously for news of loved ones. Ellie sat outside the radiology department, a bandage covering the wound on the back of her head, smaller dressings on her cut hands. The doctors had confirmed she had a mild concussion but no skull fracture. They wanted to keep her overnight for observation, but Ellie had refused to be admitted to a different floor from Wren. So, here she sat, waiting while her granddaughter underwent x-rays to determine the extent of her injuries. A police officer stood nearby, whether to protect her or to ensure she didn't leave, Ellie wasn't entirely sure. After the helicopter landed, they had been separated briefly for initial medical assessments. During that time, more officers had arrived, and the atmosphere had grown increasingly tense. The elevator doors opened, and a familiar figure stepped out, Cal Jennings, the hunter who had shown her the camera footage. His expression was grave as he approached, nodding respectfully to the officer before addressing Ellie. "Miss Whitaker, I heard what happened up on the mountain. I'm glad you're safe." Ellie studied his face, trying to read his intentions. "Thank you for coming, but I'm surprised to see you here." He glanced at the officer, then back to Ellie. "I need to talk to you and to the police. There's something I have to tell you both." Before she could respond, the door to the radiology department opened, and a doctor emerged with a tablet in hand. "Miss Whitaker, your granddaughter's x-rays show a clean break to the tibia. She'll need surgery to properly set the bone and place pins to hold it in position while it heals. When can you do the procedure?" Ellie asked, rising from her seat. "We're preparing an operating room now. We'll need a consent form signed, and then we can proceed." Ellie nodded. "I want to see her first." The doctor guided her back into the department, where Wren lay on a gurney, her leg immobilized and an IV in her arm. The girl's face brightened slightly when she saw her grandmother. "The doctors say they're going to fix my leg," she said, her voice small but brave. "That's right," Ellie confirmed, moving to her side and taking her hand. "They're going to put you to sleep so you won't feel anything. And when you wake up, your leg will be in a cast, but it will be on the right path to healing. Will Mom sign the papers? They said they need a parent." Ellie hesitated, unsure how to answer. The legal situation was complicated. As a grandparent, she might not have the authority to consent to medical procedures, especially with Rachel present in the same hospital. The doctor cleared his throat. "In emergency situations involving minors where guardianship is unclear, we can proceed with treatment that's medically necessary with the consent of available relatives. Given the circumstances, your signature will suffice for now, Miss Whitaker." Relief washed over her. "Thank you. I'll sign whatever you need." After completing the necessary paperwork and promising Wren she would be there when she woke up, Ellie returned to the hallway where Cal and the officer were waiting. "We should talk somewhere private," Cal suggested. The officer led them to a small consultation room where two other police officers were already waiting. Once the door closed behind them, Cal took a deep breath. "First, I want to say how sorry I am for everything that's happened," he began. "What I have to tell you, it's not easy." Ellie steeled herself. "Just tell us the truth, Cal." He nodded grimly. 3 weeks ago, I found Rachel, Daniel, and the twins already in my cabin. They had stayed the night after getting caught in the storm. Daniel explained they had ventured into that area and couldn't make it back safely when the weather turned. Your cabin? Ellie interrupted. That's your hunting cabin? Yes, I've had it for years. It's not on any official maps. Built it myself on a remote parcel, Cal continued. I let them stay because the girls were exhausted and frightened. Daniel promised they'd leave once things improved, and the girls felt better. Cal paused, visibly struggling with his next words. I left them there for privacy, intending to return to the lodge myself, but the weather worsened. A hailstorm moved in. I was halfway back when I heard screaming, children's voices. The room had gone completely still, all eyes fixed on Cal as he forced himself to continue. I followed the sounds and saw Rachel push Daniel off a cliff edge. He fell to his death. The twins were nearby, hiding behind trees. Rachel kept telling them to stay where they were. Ellie's hand flew to her mouth, a strangled sound escaping her throat. She had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed was devastating. Why didn't you report this immediately? One of the officers demanded. Cal's shoulders slumped. Rachel saw me watching. I wanted to confront her, but with the weather and the unstable cliff, I was afraid for my own safety and for the children. So, we went back to the cabin, and that's when she made me an offer. If I let her and the kids stay hidden in my cabin until someone naturally found them, she'd pay me enough to retire and disappear. Said she'd get the money from Daniel's life insurance. He couldn't meet Ellie's gaze as he continued. I'm ashamed to admit I considered it, even agreed to it initially. For 3 weeks, I brought them supplies, food, firewood, whatever they needed. $2 million, Ellie said quietly. That was Daniel's life insurance policy. Rachel is the primary beneficiary, but only if Daniel died while they were still legally married with no criminal charges or proven intent. Cal nodded. Rachel said her husband had recently consulted a lawyer about changing his will, creating trust funds for the twins in case of his death or divorce, but the paperwork wasn't finalized yet. One of the officers leaned forward. So, what changed? Why are you coming forward now? Why did you help Mrs. Whitaker? Several things, Cal answered. Seeing those missing person posters everywhere, watching how the girls grieved their father, it wore on my conscience. But what really decided it was overhearing Rachel on the phone with her lawyer. She was planning to implicate me in Daniel's death to avoid sharing the money. That's when I knew I couldn't be part of this anymore. He turned to Ellie, genuine remorse in his expression. I'm sorry I didn't lead you directly to them when you showed me that poster. I was scared and selfish. But when I saw Rachel and only one child leaving the mountain this morning, I knew something was terribly wrong. That's when I called the police. Ellie stared at him, a complex mix of emotions churning within her, gratitude that he had ultimately helped save Ren, fury that he had protected Rachel for so long, disgust at his willingness to profit from her son's murder. She killed my son, Ellie said, her voice barely above a whisper, and you helped her cover it up. I know, Cal acknowledged. And I'll accept whatever punishment comes my way. I just couldn't live with myself anymore. One of the officers stood. Mr. Jennings, we're placing you under arrest as an accessory after the fact to homicide. You have the right to remain silent. As the officer continued reading Cal his rights, Ellie tried to process everything she had learned. Daniel hadn't died in a tragic accident trying to save his family. He had been murdered by his wife in cold blood, with his children nearby as witnesses. The officers handcuffed Cal and prepared to lead him out. Before they did, he turned back to Ellie one last time. For what it's worth, Miss Whitaker, I truly am sorry. Without me coming forward, you might never have found your granddaughter. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Ellie raised her hand for a moment, looking as though she might strike him. But then her arm dropped back to her side. You're right about one thing. Without you, I might never have found Ren and Ivy. For that, I thank you. But forgiveness, that's something I can't offer right now. After Cal was led away, the remaining officer explained the next steps to Ellie. We're moving to arrest Mrs. Rachel Whitaker now. With Mr. Jennings's testimony and what we expect to learn from the children, we have enough to charge her with first-degree murder and attempted murder. What about Ivy? Ellie asked. Where is she now? She's in a secure room with a child advocate. Rachel has been kept separate since we became aware of the conflicting accounts. A knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse poked her head in, looking directly at Ellie. Miss Whitaker, your granddaughter is out of surgery. Everything went well, and she's in recovery now. You can see her soon. Thank you, Ellie said, relief evident in her voice. At least one thing was going right today. The officer stood. I need to join my colleagues. We're going to Rachel's room now to formally arrest her and read her rights. Would you like to be present? Ellie considered for a moment, then nodded. Yes, I need to look her in the eye. They walked together down the corridor to another wing of the hospital. Outside a room guarded by a uniformed officer, several police officials were gathered, speaking in low tones. They acknowledged Ellie with respectful nods as she and the officer approached. We're ready, the lead detective said. Miss Whitaker, you can observe, but please allow us to handle this officially. Ellie agreed, and they entered the room. Rachel lay in a hospital bed, and 4 in her arm and monitors tracking her vital signs. Her expression hardened when she saw Ellie. Rachel Whitaker, the detective began formally, you are under arrest for the murder of Daniel Whitaker and the attempted murder of Eleanor Whitaker and Ren Whitaker. You have the right to remain silent. As the detective continued reading Rachel her rights, Ellie watched the woman who had killed her son. Rachel's face remained impassive until the detective mentioned Cal's testimony. He's lying, Rachel spat. Cal was the one who. Save it for your lawyer, the detective interrupted, continuing with the Miranda rights. When he finished, Ellie stepped forward. Why, Rachel? Daniel was a good husband to you. Rachel's expression twisted with bitterness. Good. Is that what you think? We had been arguing for months after I caught him cheating on me with some woman from his office. Daniel would never cheat, Ellie said firmly. That's not who he was. I saw him meeting up with women multiple times, Rachel insisted, with that friend of his, always the same excuse about networking and business meetings. And then he started talking about changing our prenuptial agreement. He was planning to leave me for someone else. Ellie shook her head. You don't know the full story. You just assumed the worst and acted on it. The hiking trip was supposed to fix things, Rachel continued, as if Ellie hadn't spoken. A way for us to reconnect as a family. But he kept denying everything, refusing to cut ties with that friend. I just snapped. So, you pushed him off a cliff? Ellie asked incredulously. With your daughters nearby? They weren't supposed to follow us outside, Rachel said defensively. I told them to stay in the cabin. One of the officers placed handcuffs on Rachel's wrists, securing them to the bed rail. Mrs. Whitaker, you'll remain in custody here until you're medically cleared for transport to the detention center. Rachel glared at Ellie. This isn't over. It was over the moment you decided to murder my son, Ellie replied coldly. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison, and you'll never see those girls again. Leaving Rachel under guard, Ellie made her way back to the recovery area, where Ren was beginning to wake from anesthesia. The child's leg was encased in a cast from foot to mid-thigh, elevated slightly on a pillow. Grandma Ellie, Ren murmured groggily as Ellie took a seat beside her bed. I'm here, sweetheart, Ellie assured her, gently taking her hand. The surgery went perfectly. You're going to be just fine. Where's Ivy? The girl asked, looking around blurrily. She's here in the hospital, too. You'll see her soon. I promise. Later that evening, after Ren had been moved to a regular room and fallen into a deep, medication-assisted sleep, Ellie was granted permission to visit Ivy. The child was in a room down the hall, a social worker sitting quietly in the corner. Ivy looked up as Ellie entered, her eyes wide and uncertain. She resembled her sister so closely, yet the experiences of the past weeks had marked her differently, a weariness in her gaze that no 7-year-old should possess. "Hi, Ivy," Ellie said softly, approaching slowly. "Grandma Ellie," the girl's voice trembled. "Where's Mom? Where's Ren?" Ellie sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to crowd the child. "Ren is in another room resting. Her leg was hurt, but the doctors fixed it. She's going to be okay. And Mom," Ellie paused, choosing her words carefully. "Your mom is with some people who are trying to understand what happened on the mountain. For now, you and Ren are going to stay with me." Ivy's lower lip quivered. "Daddy's not coming back, is he? Mom said he had an accident." Ellie felt her heart breaking all over again. "No, sweetheart. Daddy isn't coming back, but there's anything else we can do, just ask." "Thank you," Ellie said, grateful for the kindness shown to her throughout this ordeal. As she moved through the lodge, pinning posters to bulletin boards and near entrances, Ellie couldn't help but replay the events of that day in her mind. It had been a typical Saturday morning when Daniel called, inviting her to join their hike. "Come on, Mom," he'd said, his voice playful over the phone. The girls have been asking for their Grandma Ellie stories all week. She'd wanted to go, had almost cancelled her other plans, but the charity event she'd committed to months before couldn't be rescheduled. It was a fundraiser for wilderness education for underprivileged youth, a cause close to her heart. Next time, she'd promised. "Take lots of pictures for me." And they had. Midday, as she was setting up displays at the charity event, her phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. It was a perfect family portrait, the four of them smiling broadly against the backdrop of the mountains. She'd smiled, noting how they'd taken it at the same spot as always. Rachel had mentioned once that she wanted to create a time-lapse of sorts, showing how the girls grew up against the unchanging mountains. It had seemed like such a sweet, sentimental idea. Hours later, when the charity event wrapped up and Ellie returned home, she noticed several missed calls from Daniel. There was a text message, too: "Weather turning bad up here. Cutting the hike short. Talk later." She tried calling him back immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. Rachel's phone did the same. At first, Ellie told herself not to worry. Cell service was notoriously spotty in parts of the park, but when evening came and they still hadn't returned, the worry solidified into fear. That night, she'd called the police. By morning, search parties were combing the most frequently used trails. Volunteers from the community showed up in droves, many who remembered Daniel from when he was a boy, trailing after his ranger mother on the safer paths. After a week of intense searching, with helicopters scanning from above and teams on foot below, the police began to voice what Ellie refused to accept. "The likelihood of finding them alive is diminishing by the day," the search coordinator had said gently. "Ms. Whitaker, we've covered every likely area at this point. With the weather systems that move through, I'm sorry, but we have to consider the possibility of a tragic accident." But Ellie knew her son. Daniel was experienced in these mountains, had grown up respecting their dangers. He would never have put his family at risk, would have read the weather signs, would have sought shelter or turned back before things got dangerous. Something else had happened, something beyond a simple hiking accident. Which is why, despite the police scaling back their search efforts, Ellie had returned to the mountain. If no one else would find her family, she would do it herself. As she stepped outside to post more flyers along the trailheads, her fingers stiffened in the cold. She secured each poster carefully, making sure they wouldn't be torn away by the wind. With each one, she thought of Daniel's last photo, the family smiling, unaware of what lay ahead. A young couple walked past, their gazes lingering on the poster before moving to Ellie's face with recognition and pity. She'd grown accustomed to those looks over the past weeks, but pity wouldn't find her family. Determination would. With the posters secured at the main trailhead, Ellie stared up at the mountain, its peak obscured by clouds. Somewhere up there, the answers waited, and she would find them no matter what. Ellie continued her methodical posting of the missing person flyers along the hiking trail, stopping hikers as they passed to ask if they'd seen her family. Each conversation followed the same pattern: sympathetic eyes, shaking heads, mumbled hopes for a happy ending. After the 20th "no, sorry," Ellie had almost resigned herself to another day of disappointment. Then, as she secured a flyer to a trail marker about 2 miles up, a figure emerged from between the trees to her right. A man in his 50s, dressed in camouflage with an orange safety vest, approached her with purposeful strides. "Excuse me," he called out, his breath visible in the cold air. "Mind if I take one of those?" Ellie turned, studying him. He had the weathered look of someone who spent more time outdoors than in, a thick beard peppered with gray and alert eyes that seemed to catalog everything around him. "Of course," she replied, handing him a flyer. "Name's Cal Jennings," he said, extending a gloved hand. "Local hunter, been coming to these mountains for 30 years. Ellie shook his hand. "Eleanor Whitaker, friends call me Ellie." Recognition flashed in his eyes. "The ranger. Heard a lot about you over the years. Respect what you've done for the park." Cal studied the flyer intently, his brow furrowing. "When did you say they went missing?" 3 weeks ago. Almost a month now." Cal reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small device. "You know, I think I should check something. I've got trail cameras set up for tracking game movements." Ellie's pulse quickened. "You think you might have caught something?" "Maybe. Worth looking." Cal manipulated the device's screen, scrolling through what appeared to be a series of photos and video clips. His movements became slower, more deliberate as he focused on particular segments. "What is it?" Ellie asked, unable to contain her hope. "Did you see something?" Cal didn't answer immediately. Instead, he continued reviewing footage, occasionally glancing between the screen and the flyer in his hand. Then he stopped, his finger hovering over the display. "Miss Whitaker, I think you should see this." He turned the device toward her. The footage was grainy, the forest around it shrouded in mist, but Ellie's heart nearly stopped when 3 figures moved across the frame, a woman with shoulder-length hair and 2 small children, all moving with evident caution through the underbrush. The woman wore a light-colored jacket, coral or pink, while the children were dressed in yellow and lavender. "That's them," Ellie whispered, her voice catching. "That's Rachel and the twins." Cal nodded, his expression grave. "I thought it might be. Look at the timestamp." The date in the corner of the screen showed that the footage had been captured just 3 days ago. 3 days. Ellie's voice rose with disbelief and renewed hope. "They're alive. But where's Daniel? My son should be with them." Cal zoomed in as much as the footage quality would allow. "This is a fixed camera. It only captures what passes directly in front of it. Your son could have been walking behind them, or he might have taken a different route. There's no way to tell from just this." Ellie stared at the frozen image, drinking in the sight of her family. They looked worn and shaken, moving with the cautious steps of those navigating unfamiliar terrain. At one point, they had turned slightly toward the camera but didn't seem to notice it, likely well hidden for its intended purpose of tracking wildlife undetected. "Where exactly was this taken?" Ellie asked, urgency in her voice. Cal pulled up a GPS map on his device. "Here," he pointed to a marked location. "It's deep in the northern section, about 8 miles from where we're standing now. The terrain gets rough up there. Lots of unmarked ravines, unstable slopes." Ellie studied the map, realization dawning. "That's outside the search zone. The police never went that far north because they said it was too dangerous. No maintained trails, high avalanche risk after the storms we had." "Exactly. Not somewhere a family with young children would typically venture. Which is why no one thought to look there, Ellie concluded. Cal, I need a copy of this footage. I need to show it to the police immediately. Cal nodded, already working on transferring the file. I can email it to you right now. And here, he scribbled on a small notepad, is my number. Call me if you need anything else. I know those northern reaches pretty well. Thank you, Ellie said, her voice thick with emotion. This is the first real lead we've had in weeks. I hope it helps, Cal replied. And I hope you find them safe. As they finished the file transfer, Cal checked his watch. I need to head back down. Getting late, and I've got what I came for already. He gestured to his hunting pack. Will you be all right? Yes, Ellie said, clutching her phone with the precious footage. I'm going back to my cabin to call the police right away. They walked together toward the lodge, the path easier to navigate going downhill. Ellie's mind raced with renewed possibilities. Her family was alive, at least as of 3 days ago. The police would have to restart the search now. They'd have to look in areas they'd previously dismissed. When they reached the lodge, Cal tipped his hat to her. Remember, call if you need anything. Good luck, Miss Whitaker. Thank you, Cal, Ellie replied, watching as he headed toward the parking area. She turned and hurried toward her rented cabin, new determination in every step. For the first time in weeks, she felt something beyond grief and desperation. She felt hope. The moment Ellie entered her cabin, she pulled out her phone and dialed the police department. Her fingers trembled slightly as she navigated to the saved contact for Detective Marshall, the lead officer on her family's case. Detective Marshall speaking, came the prompt answer. This is Eleanor Whitaker, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I found evidence that my family is alive. There was a brief pause before the detective responded. What kind of evidence, Miss Whitaker? Video footage from a trail camera. It shows Rachel and the twins moving through the forest just 3 days ago. Ellie explained the encounter with Cal Jennings and the location where the footage had been captured. I'm sending you the video now, she continued, pulling up her email. You need to see this, detective. We need to restart the search immediately. As Marshall reviewed the footage, Ellie paced the small cabin, glancing occasionally at the window, where daylight was already beginning to fade. It was nearly 4 p.m., and this time of year, darkness fell quickly in the mountains. This does appear to be your daughter-in-law and granddaughters, Marshall conceded after a moment. However, Miss Whitaker, we can't begin a search operation this late in the day. What do you mean? Ellie demanded. They're out there right now. I understand your urgency, Marshall replied, his tone measured. But as a former park ranger, you know better than anyone the dangers of nighttime search operations in this terrain. The area you're describing is particularly treacherous. Ellie moved to the window, watching as park rangers were already guiding day hikers back down the mountain trails. Dark clouds were gathering above the peaks, promising more snow. The forecast is calling for another snowfall tonight, Marshall continued. We can't risk sending teams into unmarked territory with limited visibility and deteriorating conditions. We'd only be creating more potential victims. As much as it pained her, Ellie knew he was right. She had conducted enough rescue operations herself to understand the protocols and the reasoning behind them. What about helicopters? She asked, grasping at alternatives. Not in these conditions, and certainly not at night, Marshall replied. Additionally, from what I can see in this footage, they don't appear to be in immediate distress. They're moving purposefully, not like people who are critically injured or lost. Ellie sank into a chair, struggling with the frustration of knowing her family was so close, yet still unreachable. So, we wait until morning. First light, Marshall confirmed. I'll coordinate with the park authorities tonight. We'll assemble teams and plan the safest approach to that area. Miss Whitaker, I promise you we will do everything possible to find them tomorrow. I understand, she said reluctantly. But I want to be part of the search team. Given your experience, I think that can be arranged. Just be at the ranger station by 6 a.m. After ending the call, Ellie sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the frozen image of Rachel and the twins on her phone. They were alive, but something wasn't right. Where was Daniel? Why hadn't he been with them on the camera footage? Cal's explanation that Daniel might have been out of frame or taking a different route made logical sense. But Ellie knew her son. He would never have separated from his family in remote, dangerous terrain, especially with the twins. He was too protective, too cautious. And why were they in that specific area to begin with? It was far off the trails they usually took, in a zone known to be dangerous even for experienced hikers. Daniel wouldn't have led his family there without a compelling reason. The questions multiplied, offering no answers, only deepening her concern. Ellie stood and moved to the window again, watching as the last light faded from the sky and the first snowflakes began to fall. Somewhere up there in the growing darkness, her family was facing another night alone in the wilderness. "Hold on," she whispered, her breath fogging the cold glass. "Just hold on until morning." As evening settled over the mountain, Ellie's cabin felt increasingly claustrophobic. The walls seemed to close in, and the silence amplified the anxious thoughts whirling through her mind. Despite the warmth from the small fireplace, a chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since breakfast. Looking at her watch, 6:30 p.m., Ellie decided to join the communal dinner at the lodge's main hall. Being alone with her thoughts tonight would only feed her anxiety. She bundled up against the cold and made her way across the courtyard toward the main building. The snowfall had intensified, large flakes drifting down in the glow of the outdoor lamps. The trails were completely empty now, every sensible hiker had returned to safety hours ago. As she approached the lodge, she could see a group gathered around the large stone fireplace in the central hall. The sound of conversation and the occasional laugh filtered through the glass doors. It felt painfully normal, another evening in the mountains for most of these people, while her world remained upended. Pushing through the doors, Ellie felt the immediate rush of warmth and the smell of food. Heads turned as she entered, conversations faltering momentarily before resuming with forced casualness. She'd grown accustomed to being the subject of whispers over the past weeks. She took a cup of hot water from the drink station and pulled an instant noodle cup from her pocket. As she found a seat at the edge of the gathering, not quite part of it, but not completely separate either, she became aware of two men talking nearby. They were about her age, perhaps a little older, their voices lowered but still audible in the momentary lulls of the larger conversation. "That's Eleanor Whitaker, isn't it?" one of them said. "The millionaire woman." "Yeah," the other replied. "What a shame. Donates all that money to the Wilderness Education Foundation last month and now her family's missing. Karma can be cruel." "If it were my family," the first man continued, unaware that Ellie could hear every word, "I'd be out there searching right now, storm be damned." 100%. "Well, she's just a woman, and she's doing this alone," the other replied, not unkindly. "Can't be easy at her age." Ellie stared into her cup of noodles, the steam rising to warm her face, which had gone rigid with suppressed emotion. The conversations around her continued, most people giving her respectful space, some nodding politely when they caught her eye, but she couldn't focus on anything except those words echoing in her head, "I'd be out there searching right now. Storm be damned." Would Daniel wait until morning if it were her missing on the mountain? The answer came immediately, no, he wouldn't rest until he found her. With renewed resolve, Ellie finished just enough of her meal to stave off hunger, then quietly slipped away from the gathering. No one seemed to notice her departure as she made her way back to her cabin. Once inside, she moved with purpose. From her bags, she pulled out her most reliable hiking gear, equipment that had seen her through countless wilderness challenges. Thermal layers, waterproof outer shell, reinforced boots. Her old search and rescue pack, still meticulously organized with emergency supplies, a first aid kit, and survival tools. She checked her GPS device, ensuring she had both online maps and offline backups loaded. Cal's coordinates were already marked. She packed extra batteries, energy bars, and her sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures. As she worked, a small voice of caution whispered that she was being reckless. The police and park rangers would be searching at first light.